mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to another episode of Thought Rock Live. I'm John Towsley, one of the co-founders of Thought Rock, and I will be hosting Thought Rock Live today. Just so you know, all attendees are automatically on mute. If you have a question throughout the presentation, please feel free to post them. You'll see at the bottom of your GoToMeeting control panel a place to post questions, and I will monitor that area and pose the questions either during or after the session, depending on how pertinent they are and how excellent we think they are. So take that as a challenge. This session is being recorded, and the recording and slides will be made available through Thought Rock Library after the show. So you'll find those there. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's session. Before we get started, I will just quickly share with you on an infomercial we have going next week. Graham Furness, a repeat presenter at Thought Rock, will be doing a presentation on top of the pyramid, defining IT services. If you tuned into my strategy session last week, this is a great pragmatic follow-on to that. It will explore IT services and how they can be defined, the key nuggets coming from that, defining an IT service, understanding the structure of an IT service, understanding the relationships between IT services, and understanding how to manage an IT service. So if you're looking for practical guidance on IT services, that's the session for you next week, same time, same bat channel. So today, on the show we have Charles Sina. He is the president of Think ITSM. Charles has been working with organizations for over 16 years in IT service management and helping address efficiencies and improve customer support by deploying new service management tools. In 2007, he changed tact and is the co-founder and president of Think ITSM, where a well-known team of dedicated service management practitioners have been engaging organizations to rethink how they measure themselves and to bring service improvement to the center of their IT's activities. As president of Think ITSM, Charles' focus is to ensure that Think ITSM continues to provide the best measurement experience for IT service desks around the world. So welcome to the show, Charles, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, John, and welcome everyone to this presentation. I appreciate you taking out the time of your busy schedules to learn a little bit about service desk management, service desk reporting, and making it relevant to senior management. So I'm going to kind of skip on because we've got an awful lot of content to cover today, but basically the essence of what we're talking about is a measurement methodology that is going to take the stuff that we're capturing on the service desk and make it valuable to senior management. As John mentioned, I've been kind of looking at service desks for a lot of years now, and I've really seen a lot of different service desks provide, generally speaking, fairly poor reporting to senior managers within their organization. And so one of the things that we wanted to do when we wrote this presentation was to come up with a way of taking what you're doing today, the existing information, and making it applicable to the people who control funding within your organization. And rather than sort of doing theory, we're really going to try and provide some actionable next steps that if you want, you can actually start doing it this afternoon if you wanted to. Okay, so number one, we're going to talk about senior management. And if there's any senior management on the phone, I'm sorry to sort of say that you're different, but you are, and we're going to talk about why you are. Number two, we're going to talk about 5 common measurement mistakes, and hopefully you're going to look at these and say, yeah, I don't do any of those things. Number 3, we're going to look at 5 steps of building a veto improvement scorecard. A veto is something that I've plagiarized completely from someone called Anthony Parinello, who wrote a book called Selling to Veto. And veto stands for the very important top officer. And in your organization, you know, that's going to be, from an IT perspective, a CIO or a CTO or potentially a CFO. And hopefully we'll have time for a few questions as well. So senior management, or veto, is different. It's a unique stakeholder within your organization. And as such, we need to provide that unique stakeholder with some specific information. And what I did was I identified the typical stakeholders that we have from a service desk perspective that we should be potentially delivering certain measurement activities to. So I've got here my customers, and I've got here my technical stakeholders, my IT department heads, and I've got here my consumers. A lot of organizations talk about their consumers and often call them customers, so these are the end users. We kind of make a definition or a clarification that if I'm not paying for the service, then I shouldn't necessarily be called a customer, and it sometimes cause causes challenges when it comes to sort of setting service level agreements. One of the stakeholders that I've identified here are our VTOs, which are sort of the C-level personnel within our organization. So what makes
Charles, we had a quick question here. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Just a quick question. Someone popped up. Are you saying or suggesting there would be different reports for each of those stakeholders, or the same set of reports?
I would say that you want to at least look at the information that you're giving, and I would argue that you would probably have a different set of reports for each one of these stakeholder groups. So yeah, short answer is yeah, I would think that you want to have different reports for these different stakeholder groups, absolutely. So when I talk about senior management, the three things that sort of make senior management unique is, number one, they're making investment decisions, and they make investment decisions based on value, not activity. And this is important because when I look at a majority of the service desk reports that ship out of the box with most of the tools that are sort of the big branded applications, everything is very activity focused. The number of tickets, the number of assignments, and the reality is that activity doesn't equal value. And so what we need to do when we report to senior management is we need to understand what is the value of the service desk, and we have to realize that it's actually not based on activity. And I understand historically IT has been very activity focused because the thought process was, if I'm busy, then my job is safe. And so everyone starts sort of looking at how busy we are, but unfortunately being busy doesn't necessarily equal value. So we're going to look at value in a moment. I'm going to say and take a guess that most senior managers don't fully understand the IT service delivery value proposition. And the reason that I say that is that a lot of organizations, and I've been recently talking at HDIs pretty much throughout the United States and in some places in Canada, and one of the things that I'm seeing on an ongoing basis is that the service desk is considered a cost in many organizations, and from that perspective, maybe the value proposition isn't necessarily being articulated effectively from the service desk to senior management. And then we look at, they focus their time and organizational investment on the best possible return. So there's obviously a pot of money, and we need to make sure that our resources and our needs are being met. But if we're not able to demonstrate what the return is of using our services, then potentially that pot of money is going somewhere else. And so we really need to understand what our value proposition is, be able to communicate it effectively, and so we get the dollars that we need to effectively run the operation. Now, VTO has concerns that are potentially removed from what's going on in our environment. And just to sort of touch upon some of those things, I've got the business drivers over here on the left-hand side, and really this is where senior management from a business perspective is concerned. There's economic uncertainty. Well, we all know about that. Technology proliferation. We're going through a revolution right now. 3 years ago, there weren't iPhones, iPads, Android devices, 300,000 apps in this store, 400,000 apps in that store. The reality is that there's more technology now exponentially than there was just a year ago, and exponentially there'll be even more next year. And so all the while that we're going through cost cutting, we're still dealing with more technology. Globalization is enabling organizations to move services from North America and transplant them to different countries far more easily than ever before. And so if we can't demonstrate the value that we provide, then our services that were being provided are going to be outsourced. The impact on IT is that IT has to continually look for efficiency initiatives because the business is looking at every single penny. IT is faced with having to say, okay, is what we're doing effective? And one of the things that's happening here is the acceleration of cloud computing, because obviously the cost of delivering cloud services is smaller when you're dealing with sort of huge virtual data centers than individual corporate data centers. And IT's role itself is evolving. In the past, IT was a builder of infrastructure. And over time, what we're going to see is that IT is actually going to be a broker of infrastructure. The infrastructure is actually going to be provided by large organizations that in a hugely virtual and consolidated way, and we're going to be subscribing to those services. And so as such, we're not going to be necessarily supporting our own infrastructure. So the service desk challenge nested in here is that we need to show value to the business. And the good news about a lot of these changes is that the value proposition of the service desk is actually going to be greatly enhanced, because to actually manage these transactions and these relationships of all of these cloud providers in the future is going to be a particular challenge that's going to require quite a sophisticated level of maturity on the service desk. So when it actually comes, though, to service desk value today, I'm going to make it very, very simple. The service desk value itself is to deliver the best possible stakeholder satisfaction at the lowest possible cost. And these are the two sort of things on a seesaw that if I'm a senior manager, these are the things that I want to be sure that we're being able to do. Because it's pretty easy to deliver good stakeholder satisfaction if I'm spending a lot of cash, but it's a challenge. It really is a challenge to deliver great stakeholder satisfaction at the lowest possible cost. And it's my duty as the service desk manager to demonstrate that I am delivering the best possible stakeholder satisfaction at the lowest possible cost. And I need some measurements that are going to help me get there. So the measurement mistakes, before we get to the good stuff, I'm just going to focus on the measurement mistakes because I want everyone in our virtual room here to feel good that we've conquered these things. And if you haven't, then we need to look at them a little bit more closely. But number one, we generate reports that are activity-based. I kind of talked about this. Well, there's no value based in activity. You know, the help desk manager can report on activity until the cows come home. That is great, and that is the person who should be consuming those activity-based reports. Get those tickets closed. How long are we spending on those assignments? Drive those numbers down. Let's get our backlog down. Those operational KPIs, that's really important. The second biggest mistake is looking and saying that everything is important. We see organizations buy these wonderful tools. These wonderful tools have incredible numbers of fields, and we basically say, okay, we're going to capture all of this information. If we're capturing all of this information, it must be important, right? Well, if everything is important, effectively what we're saying is that nothing is important. There must be some specific things that we need to elevate amongst above everything else and call them key. And these are the things that we're going to run our business by. We don't tell a story when we do reports. And you know, one of the things that I should actually throw up here is a typical report that that I actually took from a real life organization. And this is sort of the incident, what is it? Incidents, meetings, service level agreements. And what we're going to see here on the bottom is, it's an activity-based report, number one. True, it's about that we're meeting service level agreements, which is great, but it's just showing me, 1 month. So I'm not sort of seeing sort of trends. At the bottom here, I can see that I've got things like mid-range, Intel compatible, server, so sort of the same value sort of appearing at the same time. This is the type of thing that when you're generating this report that you're basically spending a lot of time exporting your data into Excel and sort of massaging it. What could this report look like? If I'm sort of reporting to Vito and I want to speak Vito's language, I would basically talk about things like lost productivity cost. Senior managers are interested in talking about money, okay? And yet when we report from the service desk, we're not necessarily talking about that. And so, one of the ways that I could take a report, like an activity-based report, is correlate mean time to restore service to lost productivity cost. And it's actually pretty easy to produce one of these reports from pretty much any service desk management application. So before I go, I just want to make sure I addressed all of those last points here. So measuring, so not telling a story. Good service desk reporting is about telling a story. It's about telling me where I was, where I am, and where am I planning to be. Okay, so I need to have a goal of where I'm going to head to. I need to provide a frame of reference for a particular report. And then 5, measurement and improvement are disconnected. So we're improving stuff, and yet we're not linking those improvements back to those reports. Okay.
Charles, we had a question here.
Yep.
What's the biggest challenge you see when you're presenting reports to the senior management or that guy you keep referring to as Vito?
So the number one thing is that we need to educate our senior management right up front and have a framework of what is important. And so the first thing I'm going to do here is actually, this is a great lead into this slide, is I've got sort of establishing an improvement scorecard for Vito or our senior management. The number one step is provide education on service desk value KPIs. There are some specific key performance indicators that demonstrate service desk value. And the key thing at the beginning of the process is to sit down with senior management and get the buy-in and say, okay, that these things are important and they directly correlate to the value that the service desk provides. And once you kind of have that buy-in, you're basically in a position to start reporting on it. I think one of the things that happens is that the help desk produces a smorgasbord of reports. You know, most service desk tools come with a couple of hundred, and they basically kind of pick a selection of them and kind of send them up there, and there's not a lot of buy-in that happens right up front. So when we look at establishing a scorecard for Veto, the number one thing we've got to do is provide education, okay? And there are certain KPIs that provide proven links. So one of the things that we do at Think ITSM is we have hundreds of organizations who every night send us their service desk data, and we actually do macro analysis on a lot of this information. And we've been noticing over the years that certain changes to certain variables have the biggest impact to service desk performance. Now, we've corroborated this research with folks such as MetricNet and also Gartner Group and Forrester, and we've come up with a set of key performance indicators that we believe most effectively correlate back to cost and quality on the service desk. And so what we focus on when we're looking at our value-based KPIs is that we're focusing on cost versus satisfaction, and we're trying to correlate this scorecard back to value. So what I've done here is I've pulled up my KPIs that I'm going to show you how we're going to build them into the scorecard and what they actually influence. And this is a slide you're probably going to want to look at again, because we're not going to have time to really go through and do it complete justice. But what you're going to see here on the left-hand side are my cost KPIs. Over on the right-hand side are my quality KPIs. The KPIs in black, the KPIs are the squares in black, and the squares in gray are the things that typically influence those KPIs. So when I look at quality, the number one measure of quality is client satisfaction, and so we need to find a way to measure client satisfaction. The second, the KPI that we found has the most direct correlation to client satisfaction is first point of contact resolution. So this is simply the measure of the number of times we give someone an answer the first time that they call us. The third KPI here is resolution to service level objectives or service level agreements. And so these three things will give us some indication as to the quality of the service that we're delivering. Okay. The fourth KPI here that I have under my quality is agent satisfaction. What we found is that if the people who are delivering the support aren't satisfied with their job, the level of customer support that's actually being delivered or stakeholder support that's being delivered goes down dramatically. So these are 4 KPIs that we're going to add into our scorecard that are going to basically measure the quality of our service desk. Now, on the other hand, we've got cost. And we've got a couple of things here that are of interest. The first one is cost per service desk contact. This is pretty easy to calculate. All you need to do is look at the total cost of infrastructure, personnel, rent, everything that's in place to actually deliver service desk support, and you divide that number by the number of contacts that the service desk receives on an annual basis, and then you're going to get a dollar figure. Now, the second KPI here is the resolution cost per incident. The resolution cost per incident is now going to incorporate a bunch of second, third line support resources, additional personnel, and it's going to be much higher than the cost per contact. So what you're actually doing here is you're building the value proposition of the service desk. The value proposition of the service desk is if I can solve more incidents at customer first contact, I'm saving the organization X number of dollars each time that I assign that ticket, because we're going to have a fully burdened resolution cost per incident over here. We also look at agent utilization. How effectively our agents are utilized has a direct relationship between how efficient we are and what the cost is on the service desk. And then we also look at our service desk maturity model. You know, we look at the processes that are currently in place, because if our processes are inefficient, we're basically leaving money on the table, and we need to basically re-engineer those processes and make them more efficient. What I've done here, though, is in gray, I've kind of looked at some of the things that influence each one of those KPIs. And so when it looks that we're trying to fix a particular KPI, these are the things that we're typically going to be influencing. And one of the things I just want to highlight here is first level resolution is different from first point of contact resolution. Okay, first level resolution is what a lot of help desks measure, which is where we're solving stuff within the service desk and we're not escalating it. That's a different measure. That's a cost. actually. So,
Charles, we have a couple of questions. I don't know if this is a good time to pose them.
Sure.
One actually is going back to the question from Peter, going back to the sample senior management report.
Yeah.
If you could just touch on what the various columns mean. And then question 2, which might be easy, is what does SLO stand for, box 3 there?
Yeah, okay, that's great. So let me deal with that one first. SLO is service level objective. So there's typically either service level objectives or service level agreements. Service level objectives are an internal IT target that you're basically going to say, what do we think we should be delivering priority 1 calls in terms of time? What do we think we should be delivering priority 2 calls in? That would be a very simple way to have an SLO within your organization. SLAs would be sort of the more mature version, which would be a service level agreement, where you're actually getting agreement from the client as to how fast service should be reported on. And going back to the other question, I think if we're talking about that lost productivity cost chart, basically on one axis I have time, and then on the other, so the x-axis is basically time, and the y-axis is lost productivity cost. And we actually have a formula that calculates lost productivity cost, and it's really basic, and it actually doesn't give you an accurate number. And a lot of people actually throw that back and say, well, that's not an accurate number. The service desk actually can't calculate lost productivity cost because you really need to have availability management in place, and you need to have a configuration management database in place, and you need to have services defined. And I would say absolutely, you're absolutely right that you do need to have those things if you were going to get an accurate number. But the thing here is, and this is the important thing, it starts the dialogue. I like to show a meaningful report with inaccurate information and show it to a senior manager and say, this is it, but you know what? The mechanisms and processes and practices that we have in place to capture this, aren't mature enough to really deliver you an accurate number. It starts the dialogue because the person says, well, what would it take for us to actually get an accurate number? And now you're having a discussion about how to improve maturity, efficiency, effectiveness within your organization. It's much better to produce, poor data, well presented than, try and get accurate information in a pretty useless report. So anyway, I hope I'm addressing these questions. So whenever we measure something, so sort of number 2 on my list here is understand required capabilities. When we measure something, I kind of say that it's an outcome of some kind or another. We're measuring to make things better. Okay, so I measure customer satisfaction because I want to show a measurable improvement in customer satisfaction. Now, sitting under that outcome, we have a couple of things. We have one thing really. It's a capability. The capability is that we need to have certain things in place to be able to have an improvement in customer satisfaction. The KPI is the measure that's going to tell me whether I'm getting there or not, but it's ultimately the capability. When we measure because we want to get stuff done. And so, to get stuff done, that capability is going to become very key. And I'm going to show you a very simple way, when you decide you want to achieve something, how to notate those capabilities and start creating action items in your organization to make things happen. Because unless you change or make things happen, you're not going to get an improvement on the measure, and you're not going to achieve the outcome. So number 3 is baselining current performance. And when I baseline current performance, I am basically doing a great service to me and my organization. I can't tell you how many organizations I've seen deploy ITIL best practices. They bought a new service desk tool, and they've never really gone through a great exercise of telling where they were at a particular point in time. And I kind of call this the Biggest Loser phenomenon. And I love the Biggest Loser, and I tell you why. It's that TV show where lots of people go on these weight loss odysseys. And the thing I love about this show is that at the beginning, they do the best baseline that I've ever seen. They basically take the person into the doctor, and the doctor basically sits them down and says that you're going to die. And then the whole family is crying, and everyone's weeping. And then sort of in 6 months' time, when you see the person, and they're fit, and they lost all this weight, and they're healthy, you basically are really part of that transition. Well, you're doing a disservice to your organization if you're going to make an improvement and you don't go through that Biggest Loser exercise and baseline, because nobody is going to appreciate how far you've come unless they really understood where you were. So baselining is really key. You need to produce a summary, so you need to have a snapshot. The first part of the baseline is producing where am I going to get the information. So this is a screenshot from what I call a data dictionary, and this is for a particular KPI. And so my KPI at the top here, if you saw earlier, I had client satisfaction, so I kind of put my KPI name here. I have things like who the metric champion is, what type of metric type it is. I'm going to get to some of this other stuff. I'd talk about the objective, the description, how we're going to calculate it, where we're going to get this information from within our organization. This is the data confidence rating. This is just a Word document that you basically would fill out. And we actually provide this to organizations as part of a toolkit that you can just kind of like fill out yourself and sort of figure out where you're going to put the various, components. It's important that you somehow take action, on that baseline, and you're going to do something about it. One of the things that I'm going to show just for 2 seconds, and the only reason I'm showing this is at the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you a website that you can go to, and you can basically, as a Thought Rock member, just sign up for free and actually do 2 baseline KPIs. One of them is surveys, and the other one is a maturity assessment. So if you wanted to get 2 of those value-based KPIs, you can do free, right after the session. The first one here is surveys, and the second one is maturity assessment. So you would sign up on this website. You're going to log in. You come here, and you basically would say, okay, I want to do a survey because I want to do my client satisfaction. You click on this, and it's going to take you through a process. Now, I haven't got time today to actually walk you through all of these things, so I'm just going to kind of like skip through, but very, very quickly, and say that you're going to get a pre-selected list of questions that ITIL practitioners have put together. You can put together a summary email. You send out this survey assessment. It's going to go to someone, and you basically would fill out an assessment, and you kind of would get a score at the end of it. Okay, but we don't really have a lot of time to capture this, so I'm just going to kind of skip through these things, except to say you should just visit the site at the end of today. Number 4. Set improvement and maintenance goals. We kind of talked about this, that really, it's all very good, providing reporting, but we want to tell that story. We did the baseline. Well, we need to actually provide an item on our scorecard of where we want to be. And really, without a goal, we find that long-term measurement really loses momentum. People report for a while, maybe when they got a new help desk tool, they implemented some new processes, but after a while, basically they lose interest. So goals really enable momentum. Goals also focus improvement action. I mentioned that we analyze hundreds of organizations' data every day. We find that organizations that implement goals find that they perform on average 25% better than organizations who don't set goals. So that's a big difference, 25%, if you look at a wide range of measurements. And I kind of say here, a measurement without a goal is a journey without a destination. You're kind of like wandering in the desert, and it gets pretty tiring pretty quickly if you don't think you're going to get to the promised land anytime soon. And I'm going to skip over here because we haven't got time. So number 5 in my process is my ARM, action, remeasure, maintain. So we're measuring, we're baselining, we're setting our goals. We actually now need to fix stuff. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, this is what our baseline is. This is what our goal is. This is where our current performance is on a given month. Well, I need to make it better. So what do I need to do? I need to have action. And so my advice on action, based on years of experience, is do not start a project unless absolutely necessary. I cannot tell you how many service improvement initiatives have failed because people try to do too much too quickly. There is the black hole of inertia that organizations specialize in, that when you actually get something that's big enough, everyone will basically try and stop that improvement from actually happening. And so what you need to do is to try and do guerrilla service improvement. Do it under the radar. Improve the things that are free. Get people addicted and hooked on your process, and then you can start gathering resources for the bigger stuff down the road. We suggest you use visualization tools that link improvements to outcomes. And I've got a couple of things that I want to show you here. Again, this is part of a toolkit that we offer to organizations, but this is something called an inventory of improvements, and it's just an Excel spreadsheet, but it organizes all of your improvements, and it gives you a way to prioritize what are the improvements that you're going to do next. So here you have an improvement item. You basically have a value of how much this item aligns to your strategic direction. How much value is this going to give back to the customer? You give it a score related to risk, the time that you're going to have to execute, and then ultimately you get a resulting priority, basically, and there's kind of like a scoring thing. And your inventory of improvements, or your improvement inventory, is just that. It's just a list of all of the things that you know you'd like to do over time, and then when you next have some cycles, you just pick one off the inventory list, and then what you do is you throw it into what we call a tactical tree. So you can use Microsoft Project for this, but we kind of use these visualizations because we think that it's actually valuable to look at your service improvement intent. So this is what you're trying to do. You break it out into tactical areas, into tactics, and then specific deliverables. This actually links into something we call an action plan, where you take a deliverable and you give it to a specific person. But the reason why this visualization works is it takes a specific deliverable and it relates it right back up to your strategic goal of what you want to actually achieve within your environment. So these are called tactical plans. You know, I mentioned at the beginning of the call about service improvement, and that, you know, not many people have that process implemented, and I see organizations all the time talking about incident, problem, and change. Well, the reality is that there's nothing in incident, problem, and change that actually describes the value proposition to the organization. I like continual service improvement because it provides that value wrapper, and we encourage organizations to look at the value wrapper of all your existing processes and hopefully, you know, demonstrate the value. So now we're getting to the really juicy part where we tie it all together. We've got to make this measure consumable by senior management, because you know what? Even the scorecard is too much information in a way to the senior manager. I want to not only give them a single screen. I want to give them a single screen. And if you're giving a senior manager anything other than a single screen, you know, you're doing too much reporting. You've got to give a single screen. But even better than a single screen is a single number. If I could provide my senior manager with just a single number, and if they looked at that number and they know that it incorporates every single goal, every single baseline, every single target that we're doing, and they can understand what that number means, I know that I've really reached, you know, the golden temple of Shangri-La. So each measure, each KPI that we identified a little bit earlier on, we're going to assign them a weighting. Even though we say that these value KPIs are pretty fixed, we know that each organization has their own emphasis on quality versus cost. You might be an organization that is very customer focused. The customer, you know, is number one. You need to get, you know, that customer level, service level, you know, at the top. So you're going to weight those customer quality service levels much higher than you would the cost. Or you could be that organization where cost is absolutely everything, and so you would weigh those much higher. And so what does my scorecard actually look like? So what I do here is I have my KPI dimension, which is basically quality, cost, quality and cost, if it happens to be. I would put in a KPI champion, so we always have a person who is actually responsible for this particular measure within our organization. And if you're in a small organization, it's probably pretty unlucky because it could be one person who's responsible for everything. But if you're a larger organization, it could be many different people who are actually doing this. Then I have my metric. Okay, my metric here are the ones that I showed you earlier: customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, compliance to service level objectives, cost per service desk contact, incident and process maturity, resolution cost per incident, agent utilization, agent satisfaction. Here is the weighting. Very important, you put your confidence rating. You're going to go through this, and some of the data you're not going to be able to have a lot of confidence in. So when you start this process, there actually will be a lot of L's here for, you know, we have low confidence. But this basically starts you down a journey for increased resources, increased funding, because to actually get accurate information here, you know, you have to probably, you know, re-engineer a few things if you know, or not. You could be getting all of this stuff right off the bat. We capture our baseline, so this is where we are at the beginning of the reporting period. We capture our target, and then we capture our actual performance. And then what we have here is something called a value indicator, which basically takes where you were, where you are, looks at your average performance and gives you a score. You sum up all of these scores and you actually get a number, one number, okay? 72 tells me that I am 72% of the way of hitting every single goal that I set out at the beginning of the year, taking into account the weighted measure. And what you do is you actually plot this value measure on a chart, and so month by month, the senior manager can actually see whether we're increasing our value or reducing our value. Now, it's nice that you can drill down into these things and really understand what's behind it, but that simplicity of a value indicator is unbelievable in terms of raising the profile and raising the value proposition of the service desk within an organization.
Charles, we have a question from Jamie.
Sure.
It is, how did you establish the weights?
So the weights are basically internal discussion. okay, within your organization. And it basically comes down to the things that what are important to us in terms of how we deliver things. And so as I mentioned a little bit, if customer satisfaction is the most important thing, we're going to give that the highest weighting. This is actually taken a little bit from a customer of ours, and last year, for example, they were part of government. Last year, customer satisfaction was actually very, very important. However, this year, cost is very, very important. So they've actually lowered the customer satisfaction rating, and they've actually increased the cost ratings for the next reporting period. And so over time, as the business changes, you can adjust these weightings and still get value from the scorecard. Earlier on,
sorry, we had another follow-on question from
Yep.
Stephen, which is, can you just revisit now how you got that value indicator, how that's calculated?
Yeah. So the value indicator is basically it is your baseline. So there's a formula that we can maybe share with folks after the session, but basically it looks at the difference between your actual performance. It looks at the ratio. So you do a calculation between your baseline and your target, you multiply it by your actual performance, and you multiply that by the weighting, which gives you your value score. And so what happens is that your value indicator here, this score can never be higher than the weighting that you've given over here. So all of these value indicators really add up to 100%. And so the maximum you can score for customer satisfaction would be a 30. So if I got a 30, it would mean that I've hit my target for customer satisfaction. So let's say my baseline was 2, my target is a 4, my actual performance is a 4, my value indicator would be 30, because it would mean that I've hit my target.
Great.
Okay.
Just being mindful of time, we do have some more time, and we have lots of attention from people, so I assume everyone's still engaged. So I will pose this other follow-up question there, which is, when you talked about picking the weights, who's engaged in that normally? Is it internal to the service desk, or is there outside within IT or to the stakeholders?
I think, yeah, I think that it's a discussion that happens with senior management. You basically look at the strategic direction of the organization in terms of what senior management, values from a quality versus cost perspective, and then you get agreement. Like the scorecard value comes when this education process is complete at the beginning. You can't just go and start delivering this scorecard to senior management without the education process, because so first of all, there has to be buy-in and understanding as to why these KPIs are the value-based KPIs. And then the second thing is that you have to get consensus and agreement with senior management. So, you probably will have a discussion internally and maybe making a proposal within the service desk of where you think you are, but ultimately a presentation needs to be made to senior management, and that weighting needs to be, decided. And when we've seen organizations go through this, and when we've worked with some organizations on actually setting this up, there's a lot of back and forth, and there's often a lot of debate about that weighting. However, it's important debate to have, but once it's set, you're typically going to keep that weighting for a 12-month period, and you're typically going to run with this scorecard for a 12-month. At the end of that 12-month period, you'd normally relook at your weightings to reset your baselines and targets for the next year. Okay.
Sorry, one last follow-up. When you say senior management, is that IT senior management or organizational senior management, or both?
For this particular scorecard, I actually think that the perfect consumer of this is really a CIO or a CTO. We have other scorecards that are more focused around for CFOs or CEOs. This is a service desk value scorecard. However, you can have a value scorecard for change management, for problem management. You can have a value scorecard for almost anything. We use service desk because we use often service desk as a petri dish for continual service improvement within an organization. Ultimately, we want the whole of IT to be focused around service improvement, and this becomes a tool that anyone within IT, you just change your measures, because there's different value measures depending on what you're actually measuring. So what a lot of people do is they would build a value scorecard for a specific service. So if you're offering a service type, and for that service type, I would think that that would be very applicable for a CEO or a COO to consume.
Great. Sorry, this seems to be a great part of discussion, and I think you have a few minutes left still. So I'm going to pose this other question. How often would you generate this report? Is it monthly to senior management? And also, would they see the actual results for each of the detailed KPIs on the scorecard?
Yeah, so I think that this has been designed to be a monthly number. So if you actually look at my my value trend here, I've kind of like positioned it here on a monthly basis, and we typically would produce it for a 12-month run before sort of reassessing what's necessarily happening. I believe that you want to share all of the drill downs with senior management potentially. Like my view is that openness leads to improvement. However, I do understand, and I've seen that sometimes people just show the value indicator to senior managers, and the other stuff is kind of hidden just because maybe the senior manager doesn't want to spend the time on it or whatever it happens to be. But it's nice to be able to look at the value, and then you might want to just click in and drill down and see, well, which specific item is are we not working on? And one of the things that this kind of leads me to is this concept of annotations and tweaks. So when I see changes in performance, or let's say I'm not hitting a particular goal that I set out, I don't just want to give this scorecard to a senior manager and say, this is it. I want to tell that story. And so one of the things that we do is we annotate these reports. And you can do it very, very simply in an Excel file where you can just have like an annotation section. And as I say, we produce this as part of a CSI workbook that gets people going, and it has everything that you need to sort of do. But you can just annotate it and just say, okay, this is what's happening. You can also do things like where on the chart itself, you can kind of log these things. So I kind of call them annotations and performance tweaks. And here I log an annotation, and I would put in, what's actually happening on this particular time, what's happening with a particular trend. The nice thing about this is that as we're going up or down, I'm annotating directly on the chart. And this is using ITSM Coach, which is sort of our web-based tool, but you can basically sort of see exactly what's happening sort of on the chart. But you can do it just as well in Excel. We have an Excel version of this as well. So I know that time is running out, so I do want to just wrap up and just say, that measures for senior managers or VETO should really be based on value and not activity. I can't emphasize this enough. Please don't report on activity. They're not that interested in it. They probably might not even tell you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. Deliver measures in the context of service improvement. The reason that I love service improvement is because it tells a story. It tells me where we were. It tells me where I'm going. It has the baseline. It has the goal. And it tells me where I am. And that CSI model is simple enough for anybody to follow, because that's all CSI is. Where was I? Where am I? Where do I want to be? In the beginning, focus on the meaningfulness of the measure rather than the accuracy of the data. This is big. Don't not provide a great report because you're worried about the quality of the data. It starts a discussion that makes change happen. Change happens when senior managers want to get valuable information, but they can't rely on the information. So you come back and you start that dialogue. Oh, we need to buy that new help desk tool because you know what? The tool that we have right now, we just can't log the tickets because it's just too darn difficult. Or, we're not getting cooperation from our second-line support resources because I don't manage them and they're not closing tickets, and so we actually can't produce an accurate number for you. I can pretty much guarantee that it's going to be a catalyst to change when you show somebody a scorecard because they want to get that information. Believe it or not, bad news is good news. No one believes me when I say that, but it is true. If things are bad, it is really easy to make things better. If things are great, I tell you, you have to really invest a lot of time, energy to make things great. But if things are bad, I tell you, you don't have to do a lot to make it average. Start small and earn quick success. Please don't start an enterprise project for service improvement. One of the first things that you should have on your inventory list of improvements to make those KPIs better are the things that are free, the things that don't cost anything, and the things that can be delivered in a day or less. There are lots of great frameworks out there, and I don't care which ones organizations use. And in fact, I've seen organizations who don't use any framework have highly functioning and highly performing service desk operations. The thing I love about CSI is it's not about what you know, it's about what you do. So much about best practices about, okay, I got this certification, I got that certification, and I know this and I know that, but it doesn't tell me what you did. CSI is the practice that tells me what we did. What did we accomplish? How did we do? Where were we? What was that story about? And so you know what? You don't need a framework, but you know they're there, and why reinvent the wheel if there's some frameworks that kind of make life a bit easier? Now today what we decided to do was to give you a kickstart on some of these KPIs, and if you go to thinkitsm.com/ThoughtRock, you'll be able to just sign up for a free version of our ITSM coach application that allows you to baseline your incident and service desk maturity. It will send out a customer satisfaction survey to give you a baseline for your customer satisfaction. We have an agent satisfaction, so 3 of the 8 KPIs can be achieved by going to that website and just signing up for free. There's no cost there or ever cost, you know, to do that. So with that, I think we've had a bunch of questions as we have gone along, but I want to thank everyone for coming and listening to me speak, and thank you very much, John.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. I got to tell you, I think you win the prize for the best Thought Rock speaker to date. We had 100% attendance and people staying on, lots of questions, more questions than we normally get on Thought Rock Live. For those of you who lost track of where you are, you've been listening to Thought Rock Live and Charles Sina. Thanks again, Charles. We do have one more question, and just so everyone knows, we'll hang in and keep answering and dialoguing until about 12:55 when we'll end the presentation. As a reminder, Charles' presentation will be available in Thought Rock, and so you can pick up the links to his site to get your access to the free assessments and so on. Question, if you could, Charles, just one last time, skip back and take a look at that value calculation again for us. That would be great.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're getting kudos. Excellent presentation. Thanks. Love the approach. If you could skip back and look at that chart, that would be good.
Sure. So I think the best thing, because each one of these requires, first of all, each performance metric has a calculation behind it. So agent utilization has quite an in-depth calculation. Resolution cost per incident, cost per service desk contact, and I don't have them necessarily all in front of me. What we can do, though, is maybe make available a little a white paper that we can get ThoughtRock to maybe send out that will sort of provide a summary overview of each one of those things. The important thing to remember, and just the important thing to remember from a concept basis is that all you're doing here is you're taking the difference between where you were, where you are, so your baseline and your target, and your actual performance. And so it's just a simple equation to say if my baseline is 2 and my target is 4 and my actual performance is 3, my value indicator is going to be at 50% times by my weighting, which is then going to take me to 15%. I don't know whether anyone's following that, but it made sense to me.
Okay, so yeah, I think it is a bit, as you said, a bit hard to follow because of the formulas, but we can post some follow-up materials in ThoughtRock and make sure that everyone gets it. I do have a couple more questions here, and we've got a bit of time, so let's go through them. One comment, actually, really helpful. Reporting is becoming critical now more than ever. And here's one. It's fairly long. I'll read it out. If we have the time, let's do it. How do we report the effectiveness of the infrastructure and the applications in an organization? For example, if a company has a major application that causes hundreds of calls per month, how do you represent that in a scorecard? The KPIs outlined on the slide show how effective the service desk is. I'm sure the CIO would be very interested in that. So I think to summarize, the question is, do you score and report on specific applications and the workload or the drive?
Yeah, so what I would recommend there is not to report on the applications, but report on the end-to-end service that that application delivers. So did the question writer put in what the application was?
No, but Eric, if you want to ping us with that, we can do it.
Well, let's just use an example of SAP as an example. You know, SAP enables a bunch of end-to-end services, but it's a physical application. The thing that I would be interested in from a scorecard perspective is a scorecard on the end-to-end service that SAP is potentially impacting within our organization. So I would have a scorecard for my SAP service, And sitting within that, there would be a series of measures that we would put in place that would look at the effectiveness of how that measure is, or how that service is doing. So I wouldn't talk about it from an application perspective, but I would talk about it from a service perspective, which actually probably ties into your next Thought Rock session, which I think you mentioned at the beginning, was talking about services. But you can have these. This is a great scorecard for services, and if that person is interested in learning about that, I'd be happy to maybe talk with them offline and give them some suggestions on how they might rejig this a little bit.
Great. All right. We have a little bit more time. There was another question. Let's see. Hopefully you understand this. I'm a bit lost here, but what is the purpose of reporting the KPI Champion? Does that question make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So the KPI Champion is that you always want to have a point person who's ultimately responsible for delivering for owning this particular measure. And the reason for that is that nothing ever gets done if you don't make people accountable for things. And so if it's just sort of a woolly measure and there's like a committee or whatever it happens to be, this is really about making things happen. The reason why we try and make it simple is we want to make it to the point where if something isn't going right, we can action it. And if we want to action something, I know that the person that I need to speak to is the person listed on the scorecard. And if the person who's listed on the scorecard knows that they're listed on the scorecard, you can better believe that everyone is really focused on doing their level best to actually making sure that that key performance indicator is scoring well. So, it's all about accountability.
Excellent. Okay. Follow-on question to the service, individual service question, I think, are related. Do you have a template for service reports that you can share? I have 2 issues reporting on availability of a service versus component of a service, i.e. a piece of infrastructure.
Right. So yeah, so again, maybe you can forward me that person's contact information offline and we can get back to them sort of separately.
Yep, okay. Yep, so we've got that. Couple other comments. Fantastic speaker. I can't believe this was free. Amazing. That's what we're trying to strive for in Thought Rock. We're looking to bring value to our members each and every week. And once again, Charles, thanks again. I don't get to listen to all of these presentations myself, and sometimes I do them, but from my perspective, I would award you with the Speaker of the Year.
Well, thank you. I'm blushing now, so we have to wrap it up.
Yep, I think we should wrap up. I don't see any other questions. Lots of positive comments. Oh, sorry, one more. What is the purpose of the confidence rating?
So the confidence rating is that dialogue component where you might not be able to, for example, measure your resolution cost per incident because you went to accounting and you asked them for the numbers and they basically wouldn't give them to you. So then you went to Gartner and you said, okay, I'm going to get estimates. So you would put a low rating because you haven't got your specific organizational information. You'd go to the senior manager and you'd say, this is where we're at with resolution cost. We weren't able to get that information. And then it becomes a catalyst to say, well, he would say, well, what do you need to get that information? There's a formula behind resolution cost per incident that's already been identified. And then, you can basically use that confidence rating to hopefully act as a catalyst to make things happen, to allow you to get the information you need. Because a lot of this stuff the organization knows, but actually finding it and actually having doors unlocked for you becomes a challenge. So you need to have sort of the honest dialogue and saying, well, I tried, couldn't get it. Then you need a senior manager to basically make that happen for you.
Fantastic. All right, I think that's the wrap-up of the questions. Once again, Charles, fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for joining us. Everyone, thanks for joining us. Same time again next week. Graham Furness will be online talking about the top of the pyramid and defining IT services. And please don't hesitate to log into Thought Rock and look for follow-up to this presentation, the recording of this presentation, as well as some follow-up content potentially with templates and formulas. So thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you.